The silence was deafening. For 5 long years, I had been living in this house, a prisoner in my own marriage. It wasn't just the cold stares or the empty dinners. It was the complete absence of him, his love, his attention, his touch. Lucas, my husband, had completely shut me out, all because of one mistake. The slap I delivered to his first love, Evelyn, on our wedding day. I didn't know it then, but in that single moment of rage, I had unknowingly sealed my fate. I never thought he would forgive me for it. I didn't even know why I had done it. Only that I couldn't stand seeing her there, trying to tear apart the life we were supposed to build. He didn't speak a word. He didn't even touch me. He ordered me to kneel in front of our guests. I refused at first, thinking it was a bad dream. But his eyes, they were colder than I had ever seen, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't going to back down. I was to kneel or face the consequences. So, I did. I had spent years wishing for his love, for his attention, for a glimpse of the man I had married. But now, with a child growing inside of me, everything changed. It was a secret I couldn't share with him, not yet. How would he react? Would he even care? The man who had ignored me for so long had never once shown any interest in my well-being. Why would he now? The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration turned into a humiliating spectacle. I kneeled, my knees trembling, my heart breaking as I realized that the man I loved more than anything in the world had decided to punish me for something I could never take back. I had acted out of desperation, hoping he would stand by me, but instead, he chose her. From that day forward, he made it clear that I was nothing but a shadow in his life. I had become the woman he could not forget, but in the worst possible way. At first, I thought I had imagined it, or perhaps I was losing my mind. How could I be pregnant? Lucas hadn't touched me in years, but there it was, a tiny miracle growing inside of me, a child who would forever be a part of me, no matter what happened. The news was terrifying, but in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in so long. I could still have something of my own. I could still build a future, even if Lucas had already forgotten about me. I was his punishment, his burden, and he made sure I knew it every single day. He kept reminding me of the slap I had given Evelyn. He kept reminding me of the mistake I had made. The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, but instead, it became the beginning of my suffering. That night, he turned his back on me, and the punishment didn't stop there. It went on for 5 years. 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of silence, 5 years of watching him choose everyone else but me. He never touched me again. He didn't hold me at night. Every evening, we slept in the same bed, but there was no warmth, no connection, only the coldness of a man who had turned his back on the woman he had once vowed to love. I became a ghost in my own marriage, walking through life with a smile that never reached my eyes. I kept waiting for him to come to me, waiting for him to realize the depths of my regret, but he never did. It wasn't until I found out I was pregnant that something inside me started to shift. I didn't know how to feel about the pregnancy. I carried the child in silence, nurturing this tiny being who became my world. Oliver, my son, was my salvation. The pain I had endured, the loneliness, the heartache, it all faded when I looked into his eyes. I had stopped waiting for him. I had stopped hoping that the man I loved would return to me. And in that moment, Lucas realized that he had lost me, but not in the way he thought. He was the reason I still had hope. But the question remained, how would Lucas handle the truth? Would he even acknowledge this child? And if he did, what would that mean for me? The day finally came when Lucas realized the truth. It wasn't just the birth of our son that shocked him, it was the fact that I had moved on. The realization hit him like a freight train. For 5 years, Lucas had buried himself in anger, punishing me for a single act of defiance. I know I've hurt you more than anyone ever could. The pain of the past 5 years had worn me down, and the thought of returning to him, of going back to the same old life, seemed unbearable. I had spent so much time hoping for his love, only to realize that love had faded long ago. This wasn't about me, it was about his need to reclaim control, to reassert his dominance in a relationship he had neglected for far too long. His apology felt empty, like a fleeting attempt to fix something that had already broken beyond repair. I've been so caught up in my own pride, my own anger, that I didn't see what I was doing to you. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't rely on the man who had turned his back on me. His words felt hollow, and I could see the regret in his eyes, but the damage was done. He had chosen his path, and now it was my turn to choose mine. You've spent years ignoring me, and now you want me to fall into your arms because you've finally realized the damage you've done. I've moved on, Lucas, and I'm not the same woman you married. Yes, I had once dreamed of a happy family, of a life with Lucas by my side, but those dreams were shattered years ago. I wasn't going to let his guilt or his empty promises pull me back into a life of silence and neglect. You were right. I've been a fool. I can't undo what I did, but I'm asking for your forgiveness. My heart had hardened over the years, and though part of me wanted to open the door and hear him beg for my forgiveness, another part of me knew it was too late. He had already chosen his path. He had already made his decision about me. I know you've suffered, and I never should have treated you that way. Please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything to make it right. I had made peace with the idea of him never coming back. But there I was, standing in front of the door, wondering if I could ever forgive him for the pain he had caused me. But all those years of silence, of neglect, had cost him more than he could ever have imagined. He had expected me to crumble at the first sign of his apology. He had expected me to welcome him back with open arms, as if the years of pain could be erased in a single conversation. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The air was thick with tension, the kind that could only come from years of unspoken words, unhealed wounds. We need to talk. He knocked on my door. But it wasn't the familiar knock of a man who loved me. It was the knock of someone who was finally coming face to face with what he had done. He thought he was punishing me, but in the end, it was himself he had hurt the most. I still remember the night he finally came to me after all those years. Alice. His voice was softer than I had heard in years, but still laced with that coldness that had become so familiar. His eyes were wide, almost desperate, but they lacked the love I had once seen in them. Instead, there was something colder, a realization that he had lost me, that the woman who had loved him so deeply was no longer the same. I didn't respond right away. When I finally opened the door, Lucas stood there, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. I know you've been waiting for me to say this, he began, his voice cracking as he spoke. But his words, though sincere, didn't move me anymore. I've changed, Alice, he continued, desperation creeping into his voice. But as he spoke, I saw through the facade. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need him anymore. I had Oliver. I had my son, my reason for living. You don't get to decide when I forgive you, I said, my voice firm. He stood there, his face paling as my words sank in. Lucas tried to convince me, to persuade me to return to him, but it was too late, and I had chosen Oliver, my son. It wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own identity. For the past 5 years, I had been living in the shadow of Lucas's cruelty, but now I stood in the light of my own strength. I had learned to live without him, to thrive despite his absence. I no longer needed him to define me. As Lucas continued to plead, I realized something important. But that woman was gone. I had spent years waiting for his approval, his love, but all along, I had the power to choose my own happiness. And I wasn't going to let him take that away from me anymore. I looked him in the eye, steady and calm. I'm done, Lucas. I'm done waiting for you to love me. I'm done hoping you'll change. I've moved on. The humiliation, the heartbreak, it had all carved a new version of me. So this is it? You're just going to walk away from everything? From me? From us? I don't need you, Lucas. I never did. His words, which used to be a lifeline, now felt like empty echoes in a vast, hollow room. One who didn't need validation from someone who couldn't even recognize her worth. I'm walking toward a life I've already started living, and I'm not going to let you drag me back into the past. And when I looked at my son, Oliver, I knew I had everything I needed. He was my future, not Lucas, and you need to accept that. But I couldn't find it in myself to pity him. Not anymore. His actions had consequences, and he was living through them now. There was a part of me, a small part, that still longed for the man I had married. After everything I've done, after all the years I've punished you, why didn't you just leave me sooner? The man who had once held me, who had whispered promises of forever. The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. It wasn't just about the years of punishment, it was about me. About my own belief that I needed him to be whole, that I couldn't make it without him. It had taken me far too long to realize that I could. And it took Oliver's existence to make me see the truth. But that man was gone, and in his place stood a stranger who had allowed his own bitterness to fester, who had let pride control him instead of love. He had spent 5 years punishing me for a mistake I made in a moment of weakness, and now he was facing the consequences, not just of my rejection, but of the truth. He had lost me, and there was nothing he could do to get me back. But I didn't. I couldn't. Every moment I had spent hoping for his return, for his affection, had led me down a path of self-doubt and despair. But now, I knew something he didn't. I was strong enough to stand on my own. I didn't need him. For a moment, he just stared at me, as if trying to find some trace of the woman he had once known. Lucas's realization came crashing down on him like a wave. But the moment of his defeat was also my victory. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at him. It was about reclaiming the power I had unknowingly given him. I had found my voice, my strength, and it was mine to keep. Lucas stood there, motionless, as if waiting for me to change my mind, to take back my words. As I looked at him, the man who had once been my everything, I realized how much I had changed over the years. "I've spent 5 years," I said quietly, my voice steady, trying to make sense of everything. "But now I understand." His face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but it didn't touch me the way it once did. "No," I replied, the words clear and final. "I'm not walking away." As I said those words, I could feel a sting in my chest. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a woman who had learned to survive on her own. Lucas's eyes flickered with something: regret, guilt, maybe even recognition of the depth of his loss. "I don't understand, Alice," he murmured, his voice barely audible. For a moment, I didn't answer. "You thought I needed you," I said softly, the words both painful and liberating. "But I didn't. I needed myself." Lucas took a step forward, his face now twisted with emotion, as if the weight of what was happening had finally hit him. He reached out, as if to touch me, but stopped mid-motion. He hesitated, unsure of what he was asking for, what he wanted from me, from the woman he had broken. "I've made so many mistakes, Alice." Lucas's shoulders slumped, his pride now shattered in front of me. But it wasn't a victory. It was the end of something I had already let go of. "I'm sorry, but I didn't." Instead, I looked at him with a calmness I hadn't known I possessed. "Please, let me fix this," he pleaded, his voice raw. I wanted to scream, to throw every ounce of hurt I had accumulated at him. "You can't fix this, Lucas. Not anymore." But as I watched Lucas slowly fade out of my life, something inside me began to shift. But now, I realized something crucial: I didn't need him to be happy. I didn't need his approval to feel worthy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. At first, I'd thought about listening, about seeing if maybe, just maybe, we could start over. But as the days passed, I realized there was no point. What was left between us? Pain? Regret? A marriage that had already been broken beyond repair? I still remembered the man I had married, the one who had made me feel special, the one who promised to love me forever. Oliver had been my turning point. He had come into my life when I needed him most, and he gave me the strength to keep going. He was the light in the darkness that had surrounded me for so long. I couldn't let him grow up thinking that I had ever needed someone who treated me the way Lucas did. That man felt like a stranger now. The Lucas who had come to apologize was someone different. I wasn't sure if he truly understood the damage he had caused. Maybe he did, but I wasn't going to wait for him to fix it anymore. And just like that, the moment that had felt like an eternity came to an end. "I'll never forgive myself for what I've done to you," he whispered, almost to himself. "You don't have to," I said, turning away. "I've already forgiven myself." With those words, I knew it was over. There was no more pain, no more longing, no more waiting for him to see what he had lost. There was no more need for him in my life. I had a son who loved me, a son who made everything worth it. It had always been right here, in my arms, with him. My journey, my story, had already moved past the broken pieces of our marriage. It was finished. For so long, I had allowed Lucas to define my worth, but now, I was finally free. Free from the shackles of his neglect, free from the emotional abuse, free to live my own life. As I walked away from him, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I could feel the sunlight on my face, a reminder of the new day I was stepping into. It was a day filled with possibilities. I didn't need Lucas's forgiveness anymore. I had forgiven myself. I didn't need his approval. I had built my life without him. And as I held Oliver close, I realized that the love I had been searching for all these years wasn't lost. The next few days felt like a blur. I had never expected it to be this way. Lucas had always been my world. For years, I had spent my days waiting for him to love me again, to see me for who I truly was. But that didn't mean it was easy. I had been stuck in the past for far too long. Lucas kept trying to talk to me, calling, sending messages, but each time, I felt less and less compelled to respond. A few months later, as I sat in the living room with Oliver, there was a knock on the door. I didn't expect anyone, and when I opened it, I was surprised to see Evelyn standing there, a look of uncertainty on her face. "Can I talk to you?" she asked hesitantly. The tension was thick, but I could tell she wasn't here to cause trouble. She seemed different, more fragile than I remembered. I nodded, motioning for her to come inside. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said, her voice soft. After everything that had happened, after all the years of silence and pain, it was hard to imagine Evelyn as anything other than the woman who had caused so much chaos in my life. But I've moved on. I'm not interested in reopening old wounds. But as I looked at her, I saw something new in her eyes. Regret. I understand. I wanted to apologize. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about understanding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the pieces of my life were starting to fit together. The fear of being alone, the fear of being unloved, had faded away. I wasn't just a woman who had been abandoned. I was a mother, a woman of strength, and I had something far more valuable than a man's approval. I had my own sense of self-worth, not for Lucas, not for what happened between you two, but for being a part of something that hurt you. I was living it, fully and completely. And I didn't need Lucas or anyone to define who I was anymore. Lucas was still in the picture, but not in the way he used to be. He was no longer the center of my life, and that realization was more powerful than anything I could have imagined. The more I focused on myself, on Oliver, the clearer my path became. I was finally free, free to love, free to live, and free to be exactly who I was meant to be. I know Lucas is still hurt by what you did at the wedding, but I want you to know that I never wanted to come between you two. I never wanted to hurt you. I watched her closely, unsure of what to say. I hadn't expected an apology, especially not from her. But as I listened, I realized that maybe she too had suffered. Maybe she had been caught in a web of mistakes, just like I had. "I'm not sure what you want from me, Evelyn," I said slowly. Evelyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Her words caught me off guard. "I know I can't change the past, but I hope you can find peace. You deserve it." "I don't need your apology," I said gently, "but I appreciate it." She looked at me, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. And just like that, she was gone. It was an unexpected moment of closure, but one I didn't realize I needed. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change. I began to see the world in a new light. One evening, as I sat with Oliver watching the sunset, I realized that this was my life now. I wasn't waiting for anyone to save me. Oliver ran to me, his little arms wide open as he shouted, "Mommy, look, I'm going to be the best kid ever." I laughed, picking him up and spinning him around. "You already are, baby. You already are." The weight I had carried for so long, the guilt, the regret, the anger was gone.